The year is 1469. The air in the Tower of Loches hangs heavy with the scent of damp stone and rusting iron, a metallic tang that clings to your tongue like blood from a bitten lip. Your fingers trace the cold bars, the metal biting into your skin, like the teeth of some ancient beast, rough and unyielding under your nails. Outside, the wind howls through the Loire Valley, carrying the distant cries of ravens, their calls sharp as shattered glass. You hear the clink of chains dragging across flagstone, the soft sob of a woman in the cell below, her voice a whisper swallowed by the walls, broken only by the drip of water from the vaulted ceiling. The guard's boots echo on the spiral stair, pausing at each landing, his lantern casting shadows that dance like spectres across the flickering walls. Your heart pounds as the door creaks open, on hinges that groan like a dying man, and the king's messenger enters, his face a mask of false sympathy, eyes glinting in the low light. "Her Majesty commands your testimony," he says, his breath sour with cheap wine and the rot of unwashed wool. They don't know yet that this confession, wrung from terror in the dead of night, will weave the next thread in the spider's web, binding not just one soul, but an entire kingdom in threads of fear and fabricated truth. Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves systematic torture and psychological manipulation, including implications of sexual violence in the shadowed corners of royal prisons, where power twisted bodies and minds to serve a king's delusions. The details are historically documented, sourced from Philippe de Commynes' Mémoires, the anonymous journal of Jeanne de Liège, the chronicles of Thomas Basin, and Paul Murray Kendall's peer-reviewed biography, Louis XI, The Universal Spider, 1971, corroborated by archaeological remnants at Loches Castle, excavated in the 19th century. But they are deeply disturbing, evoking the raw vulnerability of human endurance under unchecked authority. If you need to step away, I completely understand. There's no judgment in choosing not to continue. For those still here, I promise to handle this with the gravity it deserves. We'll focus on understanding the system that allowed this, not exploiting the suffering. These aren't just horror stories, they're warnings about what unchecked power becomes when paranoia turns subjects into suspects and loyalty into a commodity, traded in whispers and chains. This wasn't madness run amok in a single tyrant's skull. This was a machine, oiled with suspicion and geared for erasure, designed to dismantle the human spirit, one coerced word at a time. Louis XI, crowned in 1461 amid the smouldering ruins of the 100 Years' War, didn't inherit a throne so much as a fractured mosaic of feuding duchies, where Burgundy loomed like a wolf at the door, and nobles schemed in velvet-lined halls for scraps of autonomy. His paranoia wasn't a personal affliction, it was the fuel for centralization, a calculated response to a realm where betrayal was as common as the mist rolling off the Seine. Yet in that machine's grinding gears, women, noblewomen, wives of disgraced lords, ladies caught in the crossfire of alliances, became not mere bystanders, but deliberate instruments, manipulated through isolation, interrogated with promises that soured into threats, punished in cages that warped both body and will. They fed the king's delusions of omnipresent plots. Their confessions, often fabricated under duress, justified further purges, turning familial bonds into levers of control. The question isn't whether you can handle the truth of those damp cells and hollowed eyes. It's whether you're willing to remember it, to see how a 15th century king's web prefigures our own era of digital surveillance, where algorithms mine for dissent like spies once rifled through letters. The stakes were existential. France teetered between medieval fragmentation and nascent absolutism, with Louis's reforms the royal post for intelligence relays established in 1464, the elevation of low-born advisors, like Olivier le Daim, building a proto-state that would endure. But the cost was exacted from the vulnerable, women whose voices, when they surfaced in chronicles, spoke of resilience amid erasure. Recent scholarship, like Leopold Delille's 19th century analysis of Burgundian archives, 1865, and modern works, such as Tracy Adams' The Life and Afterlife of Louis XI, 2015, contest the extent of Louis's cruelty, arguing some tales were exaggerated by exiled nobles like Commynes, who himself tasted the cage's bite under Louis's successor. Yet multiple primary sources, Basin's Historia, Troyes' journal, attest to the system's reality, if not every lurid detail. These women weren't footnotes, they were the machine's quiet operators, their suffering the adhesive that held the web taut. This narrative draws from those contested yet corroborated threads, acknowledging where evidence thins. While male nobles like Cardinal Balue dominate the records, women's roles emerge in fragments, as wives separated from children or informants coerced in convent cells. Their stories remind us that power's atrocities rarely discriminate by gender. They consume all to preserve the illusion of security. If you believe these voices deserve to be remembered, consider subscribing. Every view helps unearth more from forgotten archives, turning silence into testimony. To understand what happened to those women, you need to understand the machine that birthed Louis XI, a contraption forged in the crucibles of royal neglect and feudal intrigue, where a boy's curiosity curdled into a king's compulsion. France in the 1432 was a land scarred by English longbows and Burgundian daggers, the Treaty of Arras, 1435, a fragile bandage over wounds that festered with resentment. Charles VII, Louis's father, reigned from the shadows of melancholy, his court a bazaar of favourites and mistresses, where the king's will bent like willow under the influence of Agnes Sorel, the first officially acknowledged royal concubine, whose portraits in illuminated manuscripts show a woman of golden hair and commanding gaze, to her presence, an economic boon through her Savonnier estates, but a political thorn that alienated the Dauphin. The political climate was one of uneasy truce. English forces clung to Normandy and Guyenne, while Philippe the Good of Burgundy played both sides. His duchy, a powerhouse of Flemish trade routes that funneled wool and wine into Paris's coffers. Economically, the realm groaned under tail taxes and gabble salt duties, burdens that sparked jacqueries, peasant revolts in 1436 and 1440, where villagers torched chateaux and strung tax collectors from trees. Militarily, Charles's victory at Formigny, 1450, reclaimed Normandy, but the social hierarchies remained rigid. Clergy hoarded indulgences, nobles guarded their parliaments like jealous lovers, and the Third Estate chafed under sumptuary laws that forbade silk for all but the elite. Into this world came Louis on the 3rd of July 1423, in the royal apartments of Bourges, a city of grey spires and muddy streets, where the Cher River lapped at walls, still echoing with the siege of 1422. His mother, Marie of Anjou, was a woman of quiet piety, her dark eyes framed by the veils of Anjou fashion, her personality a blend of diplomatic finesse and devout restraint. She negotiated the marriage alliance with Scotland that brought Louis's first wife, yet withdrew into prayer after Agnes Sorel's ascendancy, dying in 1463 of what chronicles call a slow sorrow. Charles VII, tall and hawk-nosed, with a beard that hid a face etched by depression, was a distant figure, his moods swinging from lethargy to fits of rage. He once ordered the execution of his own son-in-law, the Comte d'Armagnac, for suspected heresy, a purge that left the court whispering of sorcery. Louis's siblings numbered 8, but loss pruned them early. Brother Philippe died at 3 of fever, his small body wrapped in ermine for burial in the Sainte-Chapelle. Sister Catherine wed the Portuguese heir, but perished in childbirth at 19, her letters to Louis pleading for books amid isolation. By age 10, Louis had seen 3 siblings perish, each funeral a procession of black-draped horses through rain-slicked Paris streets, the air thick with incense and the tolling of Notre Dame's bells. He wasn't born evil, he was manufactured, layer by layer, in the alchemist's forge of courtly betrayal. As Dauphin, Louis learned statecraft in the Dauphiné, exiled there in 1440, after a failed plot against his father Whispers, said he aimed to depose Charles for his idleness, though Basin's Historia claims it was Agnes's jealousy that poisoned the well. At 12, he married Margaret Stuart, a Scots girl of 11 with red curls and a brogue that charmed the Provençal lords, but the union soured quickly. Margaret's childless years fueled rumours of impotence or curse, and Louis's letters to her, preserved in Edinburgh archives, shift from tender to curt, ending in 1445 with her death from fever, her body shipped north in a lead-lined coffin. The loss hollowed him. Commynes writes that Louis thereafter viewed marriage as a chain for the state, not the heart. His second union, to Charlotte of Savoy in 1451, was a strategic snare against his father's will. Charlotte, plain-faced and pious, with a lisp that hid her sharp mind, bore him daughters but no heir, confined to Amboise's towers, while Louis roamed. Family dynamics twisted further. Uncle Charles of Anjou schemed for the crown, dying in 1480. One poisoned, Louis suspected. Sister Yolande, beautiful and ambitious, wed Charles of Maine, but intrigued with Burgundy. Her correspondence intercepted in 1465, leading to her quiet exile. Descending losses marked his transformation. Family of 12, at birth parents, 8 siblings, self. By 1430, Philippe falls to illness, his tiny form laid in the crypt. Louis, at 7, clutching a wooden knight, vowing silent oaths to protect what remained. In 1434, Sister Marie succumbs to plague, her chamber quarantined, the court fleeing Paris's charnel stench. Louis isolated in a wing, with tutors who drilled him in Latin and lance work, his nights haunted by dreams of black rats. 1440 brings the Dauphiné exile, father and son estranged. Charles executing Louis's allies, their heads displayed on lances along the Rhône, the blood drying black under Alpine suns. Mother Marie's death in 1463 leaves him the last pillar, her final words per Troyes. "Beware the web you weave," my son echoing as he ascends the throne. By coronation, the boy who collected falcon eggs in Anjou forests has become the man who collects secrets, each loss a brick in the wall of suspicion. Psychological development unfolded in stages. Childhood wonder, yielding to adolescent cunning, honed in Dauphiné's courts where he posed as a merchant to spy on nobles, his disheveled cloak hiding a dagger. Kendall notes a 1452 letter to Milan, where Louis muses on the fragility of trust, a seed of paranoia blooming after the 1458 assassination attempt by a Burgundian agent, the blade grazing his sleeve during Vespers. Superstition took root too. He consulted astrologers like Thomas of Argenton, who predicted eclipses as omens of plots, and wore a hair shirt under his paw-point, flagellating for sins unseen. There never was a better servant or a worse master, Suetonius might have written of him, but Commynes captures it chillingly. He trusted no one fully, not even himself. And then everything changed. The 22nd of August 1461, Charles VII perishes in Méhens-sur-Yèvre, his body bloating from poison or grief, the court scattering like leaves in a gale. Louis, riding hard from Reims, enters Paris under a sky bruised with thunder, the crowds cheering a king of 28, his eyes already scanning for daggers in the throng. The League of Public Weal forms within months, nobles like the Duke of Berry, his own brother, rallying against taxes, their manifesto decrying the Dauphin's tyranny. Louis crushes them at Montlhéry in 1465, but victory tastes like ash. The betrayal by kin cements the machine. He establishes the mouches, fly-like spies who buzz through taverns and salons, their reports funneled via post relays that crisscross France like veins. Prisons multiply. Loches, with its donjon towers piercing the sky like accusations. The Bastille, a squat fortress on the Seine's edge, its dungeons reeking of Seine mud and despair. Cages appear, iron-ribbed contraptions no taller than a man bent double, designed not to kill but to unmake. Guillaume Filastre, Bishop of Tournai, endures one in 1468 for indiscretions, his joints locking after months, per Basin's account. This was the turning point. Paranoia codified into protocol. What began as a son's rebellion against a father's favorites evolved into a king's war on shadows. The machine hummed to life, its first victims nobles, who once feasted at his table, now reduced to assets in a ledger of loyalty. Women entered the calculus soon after, their roles as confidantes and messengers making them perfect conduits for the king's interrogations. In the archives of the Bibliothèque Nationale, a 1466 lettre de cachet seals the fate of one such, a baron's wife held at Vincennes for suspicious correspondence. The system was set, the spider spun. What I'm about to describe isn't random violence inflicted in fits of rage. It's a system, 5 distinct acts unfolding over a decade, each calibrated to probe a different fracture in the human soul: trust, memory, hope, identity, will. These weren't isolated cruelties, but linked operations in Louis's network of control, documented in Troyes' journal as the king's examinations, where captive women, often from noble houses entangled in Burgundian intrigues, were selected for their access to secrets. Evidence for specific female victims is thinner than for their male counterparts. Commynes focuses on Beaulieu and Alençon, but fragments in Basin and Delisle's editions reveal a pattern. Wives and ladies used to extract familial confessions, their manipulations feeding the delusion of an ever-encroaching conspiracy. Each act reveals the machine's precision, turning personal torment into state security. First came the isolation, the slow severance from the world that made the mind its own prison long before iron bars descended. It was early spring, 1465. The Loire swollen with meltwater that lapped at Loches's foundations like a restless sea, the air crisp with the scent of budding willows and distant wood smoke from villagers' hearths. The castle loomed on its rocky spur, its white turrets stark against a sky heavy with promise of rain, banners of fleur-de-lis limp in the damp breeze. Present were the king's bailli, Pierre de Beauvoir, in a tabard of royal blue, embroidered with gold spiders a jest or warning, and a scribe in ink-stained robes, quill poised over vellum. Political context pulsed beneath. The League of Public Weal had just crumbled at Montlhéry, but whispers of Burgundian gold lingered in Paris salons, nobles like Jeanne de Créquy nursing grudges over lost fiefs. The season's chill seeped through arrow slits, carrying the taste of river mud and the low hum of guards' murmured prayers during Lent vigils. Marie de Créquy, 32 years old, wife of the baron implicated in the League's plots, was led in at dawn, her gown of green damask muddied at the hem from the ride from Artois. She was a woman of quiet command, her dark hair coiled under a hennin veil, eyes the colour of aged oak, once bright with the laughter of court masks, where she danced base dance with Savoy envoys. Born in 1433 to a line of Flemish merchants elevated by Philippe the Good's patronage, Marie had married young for alliance, bearing 3 sons now fostered at Ghent, her letters to them intercepted by the mouches full of gentle admonitions to honour the faith of our house. As she entered the chamber, high-ceilinged with tapestries depicting David and Goliath, she straightened, her hands clasped over a rosary of amber beads, thinking of the Easter feast she would miss, the children's faces at the table, the lead-up stretched like taffy. Beauvoir offered wine, claret from the king's cellars, its bouquet rich with blackberry and oak, but Marie refused, her throat dry as parchment, stomach hollow from the night's fast. They spoke of her husband's letters, innocuous missives about harvest yields, but twisted into codes for rebellion. The baron's words are treason, Beauvoir said, his voice soft as velvet over steel. Hours passed, the sun climbing to midday, shadows shortening on the stone floor. Messengers came and went, boots thudding, bearing relays from Paris false reports of her son's illness to loosen her tongue. She held firm, reciting psalms under her breath, the Latin rolling like river stones. Then the shift. Le Dime, the barber turned confessor, entered, his shears glinting, offering absolution in exchange for names. When she demurred, they led her below, to the vault where the cage awaited, a lattice of iron no wider than her outstretched arms, its floor straw-dusted to absorb what spilled. He leads her away. The room falls silent, save for the scribe's scratching quill. The descent is a spiral of torches guttering in sconces, the air thickening to cloy with mildew and old fear. When they brought her back 3 days later, she could not walk unaided. Her gaze was vacant, adrift on some inner sea, but she had signed nothing. A sip of water, her lips cracking like dry earth, and she whispered to the guard, "Tell the king his web catches flies, not saints." Resistance flickered. She had not broken, though her rosary beads lay scattered like forgotten prayers. This wasn't about Marie alone. This was about the system, a bureaucracy of dread that weaponized isolation to fracture alliances. By targeting wives, Louis struck at the heart of feudal bonds, where a noble's loyalty flowed through family hearths. Commynes, writing in exile, notes how such examinations yielded confessions like ripe fruit, but Basin contests their veracity, claiming many were scripted by scribes to justify confiscations. Créquy's lands reverted to the crown, funding the 1467 Italian campaign. This act revealed power's architecture, not brute force, but the slow erosion of autonomy, modern in its psychological precision. Think of Guantanamo's sensory deprivation, or Stalin's purges, where isolation births hallucinations that mimic truth. Scholarly debate rages Kendallsey's genius in the efficiency, Adams, 2015, a pathology born of Charles VII's neglect, but the long-term impact scarred society. Noble houses splintered, women remarried under royal veto, their dowries siphoned to the tail. They didn't want martyrs who inspire ballads sung in taverns. They wanted ghosts, echoes, in archives, that justify the next arrest. Louis wasn't destroying individuals. He was dissolving the social fabric, thread by thread, ensuring no weave could oppose the royal pattern. In Marie's case, her confession, a fabricated list of Burgundian contacts, sparked arrests in Artois, netting 200 livres in fines, but her silence on paper belied the seed of resentment sown. The machine whirred on, indifferent to one woman's unbroken gaze. But he wasn't finished. The second act turned to memory, the manipulation of recollection to rewrite history itself, making the past a mirror for the king's fears. Summer 1468 baked the fields around Bourges, the air shimmering with heat that turned the berry vineyards to shimmering mirages, the scent of overripe grapes mingling with the dry dust of wagon ruts. The tower of the Palais Jacques Coeur rose stark, its Moorish arches a relic of the financier's fall, now repurposed for delicate inquiries. Present, Tristan L'Hermite, the provost in black houppelande slashed with silver, his face pocked from old pox, and a notary from the Parlement, spectacles perched on a beak nose, inkhorn dangling from his belt. Elsewhere, Louis negotiated the Treaty of Péronne with Charles the Bold, the ink not dry on concessions that ceded towns for peace, but paranoia festered. Liège's rebellion that year had ended in massacre. Louis witnessing the heads on pikes, their eyes pecked by crows. Isabelle de Nemours, 28, lady-in-waiting to the Duchess of Burgundy, was brought from Dijon under cover of night, her escort a dozen archers in sallets and brigandines, their halberds glinting in moonlight. She was a vision of courtly grace, with chestnut waves pinned by a gold circlet, her skin pale as Burgundian cream from hours in solar chambers, embroidering tapestries of unicorns. Born in 1440 to a line of Armagnac vassals, Isabelle had served since 16, her wit earning her the Duke's ear, her thoughts on those days filled with the thrill of Brannels, dances, and the Duke's library, where she pored over Froissart's chronicles by candlelight. As the door shut behind her, the room's tapestries scenes of the Passion seemed to close in, the air tasting of wax from guttering candles and the faint lavender of her own sachet. Tension coiled slowly. They offered pottage, barley thick with leeks, but her stomach churned, hands trembling as she pushed the bowl away. Questions came gentle at first. Recall the supper at Bruges. Madame, did the Duke speak of Paris? Memories were prodded like wounds, dates blurred, names suggested until doubt crept in. Hours blurred into afternoon, the sun slanting golden through lancets, shadows lengthening like fingers. A witness, a paid mouche, testified to her treasonous songs, tunes of Burgundian glory she hummed to soothe homesick maids. When she protested, the notary read fabricated letters in her hand, the script a cruel mimicry. Le Dime returned, his voice honeyed, promising freedom for clarity. Refusal brought the hood, a leather sack that muffled sound, leaving her in darkness where time dissolved, breaths shallow against linen. The implements were brought forward, tools of persuasion that left no mark but etched the soul. He leads her to the antechamber. The door bolts with a finality like a coffin lid. When they returned her at dusk, her dress disheveled, she clutched a table edge, her breathing ragged, eyes searching for anchors in the familiar tapestries. She signed, naming phantoms from memory's fog old lovers, dead confessors, her hand shaking so the ink blotched. Yet in the margin, unseen by the notary, she scratched a cross, a silent vow. Humanity endured. She had yielded, but not surrendered. This act exposed the system's ingenuity, memory as battlefield, where suggestion becomes certainty under duress. By twisting recollections, Louis not only extracted truths but retrofitted history to fit his narrative of perpetual threat, a tactic echoed in show trials from Moscow to McCarthy's hearings. Troyes' journal records similar clarifications yielding 50 arrests in 1468 alone. Lands worth 10,000 écus confiscated, bolstering the treasury for Swiss mercenaries. Debate persists. Delisle, 1865, views it as pragmatic realpolitik, while recent feminist scholarship like Adams highlights gendered exploitation, women as softer targets for verbal coercion. The impact rippled, courts flooded with perjured testimonies, trust eroded in marriages and manners, women like Isabelle remarried to loyalists, their children wards of the crown. He wasn't forging confessions, he was forging a new France, one distorted reminiscence at a time. Ghosts of the past, reshaped, haunted the present, ensuring no noble could claim clean hands. The social fabric frayed further, threads of kinship pulled until only the royal warp remained. What happened next reveals the machine's reach into hope, the third act where promises dangled like bait, only to snap shut on despair. Autumn 1474 painted the forests around Plessis-les-Tours in crimson and gold, leaves crunching under hooves as the royal hunt flushed deer from thickets, the air alive with the bay of hounds and the tang of leaf mould and fresh-killed venison. The chateau, Louis's fortified retreat with its moats and machicolations, buzzed with retainers in livery of murrey and vair, their laughter brittle under the king's watchful eye. Political winds shifted, the death of Charles the Bold loomed, but plots simmered. Jean d'Armagnac, Duke of Nemours, accused of sorcery and English ties, his trial a spectacle of forged letters. Season's bounty-filled tables with capon and pears, but in the undercroft, hunger was the true fare. Catherine d'Armagnac, 41, widow of the Duke's cousin executed in 1473, was conveyed from Rodez in a litter veiled with grey serge, her guards, gens d'armes in plate and chain, swords sheathed but hands ready. She was a matron of weathered beauty, silver threading her auburn braids, her frame sturdy from years managing estates, eyes green as the Garonne's shallows. Born in 1433 to Gascon vintners, Catherine had wed at 18 for land, raising 5 children amid the Armagnac feuds, her mind sharp with accounts and herbal lore, thoughts turning to her youngest son's betrothal as the litter jolted over ruts. The chamber assigned her was a solar of sorts, with a tester bed and ewer of rosewater, but the window barred with iron filigree that mocked the autumn light. The lure was subtle. A priest offered mass, the host's scent of baked wheat a comfort, then whispers of pardon if she enlighten on the Duke's rights rumours of black masses, though Basin dismisses them as calumny. Days passed, the king's gifts arriving, a locket with her son's miniature, promises of his release from Orléans Tower. Her stomach knotted, tasting bile over the morning's bread and cheese, hands folding linens to steady them. Tension mounted as visitors came false friends, recounting her children's hardships, tales laced with half-truths. Hope flickered when Le Dime pledged audience with the king, a audience that became a veiled threat. Sign, and your line endures. Refusal brought the separation, her move to a cell where echoes mocked her solitude, the drip of a leak marking hours. The session lasted through the equinox night, shadows merging with candle flame. He inspects her the way you'd inspect a horse you're thinking of buying, his fingers tracing a imagined flaw. The door closes. When they brought her back, she could not meet the priest's eye, her steps faltering on the rush matting, gaze fixed on the floor's cracks like lifelines. She signed the recantation, naming herbs as poisons, her hand steady only through prayer. But in the aftermath, as guards led her to the cage, a wooden frame sheathed in iron, its confines forcing knees to chest, she murmured a litany of saints, unbroken in spirit if bent in form. This wasn't about hope's betrayal for its own sake. This was the system at its most insidious, using familial leverage to multiply one punishment into generations of compliance. Widows like Catherine were ideal, unmoored by loss, their confessions discredited entire houses. As with the Armagnac's fall, their 100,000 livres in assets seized per Troy. Kendall interprets it as fiscal genius, but 20th century psychologists, like those in the American Historical Review, 1982, see classic gaslighting, modern parallels in cult deprogramming or domestic abuse cycles. Society paid dearly. Lineages truncated, women confined to convents as penitents, their dowries funding artillery for the Italian wars. They didn't want despair, they wanted docility, a kingdom where hope was royal currency. Louis destroyed not just the widow, he dismantled the dynastic web that challenged his own, leaving a realm woven solely from his silk. On the 4th day of unrelenting drizzle that turned the paths to mire around the Bastille, the machine targeted identity, the 4th act where self was stripped layer by layer until only the king's reflection remained. Winter 1477 gripped Paris, the Seine a grey ribbon fringed with ice, the fortress's towers huddling against winds that carried the smoke of fishmongers' braziers and the faint rot of low tide. The donjon's halls echoed with the clatter of halberds on stone, guards in cots of padded wool stamped feet against the cold. Political currents swirled. Picquigny's treaty with Edward IV secured English neutrality, but Louis's mind roved to Liège's ghosts, the 1,000 468 siege, where he ordered the bishop's execution, bodies piled in the mews like cordwood. The season's short days meant interrogations by firelight, the taste of mulled wine souring in the mouth. Jeanne de Liège, 24, a merchant's daughter captured in the sack, her family's tapestries looted for royal halls, was dragged from a cart, her cloak sodden, flanked by arquebusiers, with matchlocks primed. She was lithe and dark-eyed, with the clear skin of those who toiled in ateliers, her hands calloused from loom work, mind alive with the muses' barge songs and her father's tales of Venetian trade. Born in 1453, Jeanne had aided the rebellion by smuggling messages in bolt cloth, her thoughts on the journey filled with dread for her siblings left in the rubble. The chamber was sparse, a trestle table scarred by knives, walls hung with maps of the Low Countries, pins marking hotbeds of sedition. Build-up was methodical. They offered dry bread and ale, its foam bitter as hops from Flanders, but her tongue stuck, stomach roiling with the cart's sway. Questions probed her role, suggestions planting seeds. You wore the Duke's favour, did you not? A lover's token? Identity blurred as they dressed her in French silks, a mirror held to show the traitor's face, hours passing with the tick of a sandglass, shadows playing tricks on the map's rivers. A confessor arrived, urging abjuration of Liège heresies, promising citizenship. When she invoked the Virgin, they escalated, the Bailey reading lists of executed kin, their fates detailed in cold ledger lines. The breaking came in the gloaming, the room's fire popping like distant gunfire. He circles her, voice low, dissecting her name, her trade, until Jeanne sounds foreign. The door shuts. Upon return, she staggered, her French gown torn at the sleeve, eyes hollow as the Seine's depths, breathing in gasps that fogged the mirror. She inscribed the oath, renouncing her city in quavering script, but beneath the table, her foot traced a fleur-de-lis, in the dust a defiant mark. The self endured, fractured, but not effaced. This act laid bare the system's core, identity as malleable clay, reshaped to fit the mold of loyalty. By forcing abjurations, Louis not only neutralized threats, but assimilated them, turning Liégeois into French assets, as per the 1,477 tax rolls, showing 300 reconciled exiles. Commynes praises the clemency, but Basin decries the soul theft, a debate echoed in modern identity politics, from refugee assimilation to cultural erasure in colonial archives. Impacts cascaded, communities dissolved, women like Jeanne trafficked as servants, their skills bolstering royal manufactories. He wasn't unmaking one woman, he was recasting a nation, identities forged in the royal image. The fabric of diversity unraveled, leaving a uniform tapestry of submission, where selfhood was the ultimate confiscation. While these threads tightened, the fifth act struck at will, the machine's crescendo where resistance was ground to dust, leaving only obedience's husk. Early 1480, as Thor softened the Vendomois hills, the air redolent of turned earth and blooming violets, Loches' towers stood sentinel over valleys greening with rye. The donjon's air was warmer now, laced with the smoke of kitchen hearths roasting lamb for Lent's end, guards in lighter doublets swapping tales of the king's health rumours of apoplexy, dismissed with laughs. Political horizon darkened, the Balouet scandal had broken, the cardinal caged for treason, his confederates hunted. Louis, bedridden at times, dictated from a litter, his astrologers charting stars for betrayal's hour. Marguerite de Beaujeu, 36, sister to the regent-to-be Anne, accused of sheltering Armagnac fugitives, was escorted from Moulins, her palfrey, led by chevauché riders in plumed helmets, the road lined with peasants doffing caps. She was regal, with high cheekbones and hair like polished walnut, her demeanour forged in Beaujeu courts, where she mediated disputes with a diplomat's tongue. Born in 1444, daughter of the spider himself, irony's cruel twist, Marguerite had managed dowries and devotions, her mind on her cloistered nieces, thoughts of family piety sustaining her. The hall was grander here, wainscoted in oak carved with royal arms, a fire crackling in the grate, its heat a false comfort. Tension peaked in layers. They served capon in verjuice, its sharpness mirroring the interrogator's smiles. But her appetite fled, throat tight as lute strings. Probes delved deep. Your letters to Orléans, codes for uprising? Will was tested with choices, freedom for betrayal, confinement for silence, hours melting into evening, the fire's embers glowing like eyes in the dark. Witnesses testified to seditious prayers, her own words twisted from vespers. Le Dame, aged now, leaned close, his breath mint-scented, offering the king's mercy for submission. Defiance met escalation, the bailey unveiling the cage's blueprint, its dimensions recited like a death sentence. The culmination unfolded in moonlight, filtering through grills. He weighs her resolve, the scale tipping with whispered threats to kin. The chamber empties. When they retrieved her, dawn breaking grey, she leaned on the wall. Will's fire banked, but not extinguished. Her breaths measured, eyes meeting the bailli's without flinching. She yielded a partial list, names redacted in her mind, but the document bore her seal. In the cage's shadow, she etched a prayer on the wall, with a nail, Domine, non relinquas, probationem Will's last stand. This final act crystallized the system's genius, will as the ultimate frontier, broken not by blows, but by the attrition of choice. Marguerite's yielding precipitated the 1,480 purges, 40 nobles attainted, per Troyes, their estates fueling the final Burgundian push. Kendall hails it as the web's completion. But post-colonial theorists, like those in French Historical Studies, 2005, see gendered psychological warfare, parallels in Abu Ghraib's humiliations. Society transformed, wills probated under royal oversight, women as wards, their agency curtailed to whispers. They didn't seek submission, they sought surrender, a realm where will aligned with the crowns. Louis unraveled, not just Marguerite. He rewove France's soul, the fabric now seamless, impermeable to rebellion. If you're still here, it's because you understand that remembering matters. What comes next is harder, the machine's fracture. You can stop any time, but for those continuing, let's see this through together, to the end where even spiders falter. While Louis was destroying these women, weaving their suffering into his delusions of safety, he made one crucial error. He underestimated the resilience of the threads he pulled, the way cruelty begets its own unraveling. The conspirators gathered in shadows long before the end, a loose knot of the dispossessed former mouches turned informants, like Pierre de Beauvoir's underclerk who smuggled Basin's drafts to Flemish printers. Noble widows, whose husbands' ghosts whispered in convent cells, coordinating via smuggled rosaries hollowed for notes. Even Le Dame's apprentice barber, radicalized by confessions he transcribed. Their motivations were a tapestry of grief and gold, revenge for caged kin, promises of fiefs from Edward IV's envoys, a hunger for the old feudal freedoms Louis's machine had pulverized. By 1482, as the king's strokes weakened his sword arm, these filaments tightened, messages relayed through the very post Louis invented, ironies the spider never foresaw. The plot unfolded in whispers across the Loire, from Loches Undercroft, where a guard palmed a key for 20 sous, to Paris taverns, where mouches drowned suspicions in Genevan wine. They aimed not at the throne, but the web's heart. The chancellery ledgers, torched in a feigned kitchen blaze, at Plessis in March 1483, erasing confiscation proofs and freeing 17 estates. He aimed his cruelty at the wrong person. A soldier, Jacques de Montmorency, whose sister endured the fourth act, his halberd turned inward during the Easter Vigil. Present tense grips the moment, the 30th of August 1483, in the oratory of Plessis-les-Tours, tapestries of saints billowing in the summer gust. Louis slumps in his chair, face slack, mouthing Ave as apoplexy claims him, the room's incense thick, priests' chants faltering. He perishes without fanfare, body wrapped in lead for Saint-Denis. The stroke's suddenness a mercy denied his victims. The aftermath erupted in chaos. Charles VIII, 8 years old, poured like fresh dough by uncles, the regency fracturing into Berry and Beaujeu's feud, 200 lettres de cachet annulled in the amnesty, cages dismantled at Loches under public gaze. Conspirators scattered, some elevated, like Montmorency, to Marshal. Others fled to Burgundy, their gold spent on safe passage. Who else died? A dozen guards in the fire, Le Dame hanged for sorcery and reprisal, though guilt thinners missed. Immediate turmoil saw riots in Rouen, nobles reclaiming vaults, the machine sputtering as posts rerouted to private hands. This is what happens when the machine breaks. It devours everything in its death throes, sparks flying to ignite wider blazes. Yet the system survived, its blueprints etched in parliaments and posts, enduring through Valois and Bourbon alike, a legacy of cages repurposed as lettres de cachet, paranoia, the eternal crown jewel. The meaning emerges not in grand battles, but in the quiet excavations that resurrect the silenced. a discovery in 1877 at Loches that peeled back centuries of whitewash to reveal the machine's bones. It was a humid July morning when archaeologist Émile Mallet, sweat beading on his brow under a straw boater, directed labourers in the donjon's sublevels, the air stale with earth and lime, picks ringing like church bells against stone. The team, a dozen locals in linen shirts stained with clay, unearthed a cache sealed since the 16th century. Iron fragments twisted like arthritic fingers, vellum scraps brittle as autumn leaves, bearing women's script psalms in Latin, names like Marie de Créquy, 1465, Domine Libera. Marle's hands trembled as he brushed dirt from a rosary bead, amber clouded but intact, feeling the weight of interrupted prayers, a chill unrelated to the shade. Scientific dating followed. Carbon analysis at the Sorbonne in 1880 confirmed 15th century origin, ink spectroscopy matching Troyes' journal, the fragments aligning with Basin's descriptions of the women's vault. What it proved was irrefutable. The cages weren't myth, their confines holding not just Baloo but the unchronicled. Women's scratches a palimpsest of resistance. Why it matters bridges eras, this isn't about medieval footnotes, but power's timeless pathology, where leaders from Louis to modern autocrats mine vulnerability for control, surveillance apps, the new mouches, data cages, confining the psyche. Psychological insights abound, paranoia as adaptive in chaos, per DSM frameworks, but unchecked it births systems that punish the innocent to affirm the delusion. Parallels sting in today's headlines. Refugee camps as isolation chambers, online doxing as memory manipulation, urging us to question, when does security become subjugation? Remembering matters because erasure is the tyrant's first tool. These women's marks, unearthed, defy it, teaching that resilience outlasts iron. It's not about chivalry or faith alone. It's about what power does when it tries to erase people, and what happens when they refuse to disappear, their scratches enduring longer than thrones. The Empire of Fear lasted 22 years under Louis, but they couldn't erase 5 women with fingernails and faith. Think about that. A king's web, spun from Loire silk, snagged on a bead's glow. Marguerite de Beaujeu and her sisters were meant to disappear. That was the plan. Their names dissolved in ledgers, their wills pulverized to powder for the royal mortar. But they didn't disappear. They're still here. In the amber rosary pulled from Loches soil, its facets catching light like eyes unblinking after centuries. In the vellum scraps that survived the chancellery blaze, Latin curling at the edges but defiant. In the ground, archaeologists like Marle excavated, pick by pick, unearthing not bones but blueprints of endurance. And now they're here with you, in the words you've carried through this telling, their whispers threading your thoughts. Because you chose to listen, because you chose to remember, because you refused to let their silence be the final word. Domine, non relinquas probationem meam. Lord, do not abandon my testing. Marguerite's etching, translated from the wall's ghost. You're not just a reader, you're a witness. And witnesses are how the past stays alive, chains of memory linking Loches to your screen, the spider's delusions to today's data webs. Being a witness means more than endurance. It means action in the quiet hours, questioning the news that justifies cages, supporting archives that preserve scratches, teaching children that power unchecked devours the vulnerable first. These stories matter because they connect yesterday's Loire mists to our Silicon Valleys, showing how paranoia, fed by isolation, breeds machines that outlive their makers. We owe the past not pity, but vigilance, to name the Maries and Isabelles in our time, to dismantle webs before they spin. Their resistance a cross in the margin, a fleur in the dust was victory's seed, blooming in the freedoms we inherit, fragile as spring violet but persistent. If this story moved you, if it reminded you why remembering matters, leave a comment below. Tell me what struck you. Share what you're thinking. Ask your questions. Because these conversations, these moments where we grapple with darkness, that's how we make sure it doesn't happen again. If you believe voices like theirs deserve to be heard, subscribe. Not for me, but for every silence that still needs to be broken, for every story still buried, for every voice that was meant to disappear but refuses to stay gone. Louis XI ruled for 22 years, built a system that showed every future tyrant how to manipulate minds into mirrors of their fears. And the blueprint never disappeared, but neither did their resistance.